Okay, so hello everybody. For those who don't know, my name is Alex, aka Carryion. I was the top four Roy Mustang player in the GenCon Indianapolis Regionals, and today we're going to be talking about Red Kenshin, as it has recently taken storm in the LA Regionals. So this is a very generic guide on things about Kenshin, what to do while piloting this deck. And I think I wanted to make this guide particularly because a lot of people are probably going to look at the LA regionals and think, oh, this should be a deck that, either we play or we try and prep for, which I would highly recommend going into the next set of regionals, particularly I believe this next one is Ottawa. So for those of you who are curious as to how the deck works, what it does well into, what it doesn't do well into, this is the guide for you. Okay, so first and foremost, we're going to be talking about things to expect, which is to start the pros and cons of the deck, the actual deck list itself, some card considerations that you can, substitute within the deck that is at least worth considering, and then the bread and butter is going to be the matchups and win conditions. And then last and certainly not least is generic useful info that anyone can kind of take a look at and get something out of, even if you're not a player who plays specifically Red Kenshin. I'm hoping that's a little more generic, but also still applies a little bit to the deck. So some pros. Red Kenshin to start off is a aggro control archetype, and it primarily tries to gain a win condition by either resource starving the opponent or manipulating their board in such a way that you can eventually force a checkmate board state. And one of the big keys of a deck that, for those who don't know, the gimmick is to, instead of sidelining characters on winning a battle, push back the opponent, is that it forces your opponent to make decisions in the middle of your turn. So when Kenshin is supposed to knock out a character, it would instead push it to the energy line, and the opponent has to decide, who do I remove from my energy line in order to make space for this character being pushed back in. Some of the key parts of that decision is if they have a whole bunch of double energy, then you're probably forcing them to take something away that is a single energy generator. But B, if they already have a 4K body or a really good aggressive option, by pushing something back into the energy line, you give them the decision of, do I keep my good energy generation or do I discard it to save my aggression for the next turn? So it can be really difficult for a lot of players, particularly those who are not used to the deck, and as a result, very punishing if they make small mistakes. The deck itself is a really well-rounded early, mid, and late game. You have early aggression and sort of a rush archetype that other games and other decks probably are familiar with. An obvious example is the Red Ashford deck, kind of similar to that. But it also has a really solid mid-game, has a lot of board presence, board control, an incredible amount of 4K bodies, some of which are really cheap. I think it's the only deck in the format that has a 2-cost 4K on a defense. So that's pretty insane. And then in the late game, because you're accumulating all these small changes and decisions on board pressure, you force the opponent to eventually create a board state where for you, it's effectively a checkmate and there's nothing they can do except just let you whittle them to nothing. And lastly, one of the big pros is the deck has a lot of filter and a lot of draw. It carries a good number of draw triggers, a good number of draw one, pitch one as one played effects, and some great draw supporters as well, which we'll talk about later. So some cons with the deck. As is the case with a lot of aggro decks in Union Arena, you tend to lose your hand advantage very quickly, and there are some cards that do support this because you have so much draw, but to a degree you're effectively looking to use all 3 AP to either draw cards or spend cards, no in between. You're very reliant on the Kaoru Kamiya card for double energy generation. It is the, I believe, only double energy generator in the deck. Um, there are two different SRs for it, and both have very useful supporting effects, but unfortunately, because this is a 4-cost ceiling deck, the double energy generators you don't want to, fill your hand with them because it's not necessary. So you typically will lower the counts of them, and if you lower the counts of them, it's a little harder to hit. So that's just part of the sacrifice. There are no natural 5k bodies. I'll talk about how we get around that, but if you were to play every card as a vanilla card, none of them says 5k on the actual text. And then lastly, knocking out characters requires some forethought. There are some characters or some cards that allow you to actually sideline characters, but those are very conditional because it also affects how your supporters interact on the board. So you really have to give it a little bit of thought as to whether or not it's worth doing this at a certain point in time. So what we have on the screen right now is what I call the base deck list, and this is like the skeleton bare minimum of what Kenshin as a deck should be built like. So you have your 12 zeros, your 4 ones for a total of 16 zeros and ones. Fairly standard. This is like the bare minimum to play the game. You have a couple 2 costs and a couple 3 costs, and most notably, you have a 2-cost Kaoru Kamiya that is a double energy generator, and its only condition is that there's a Kenshin in the front line. And that's actually really, really easy to fulfill as a condition. In fact, a lot of characters in other IPs, for example, would say, generate 2 energy if this card's active, which means the turn it's played usually is not a double energy generator. In this case, as long as you have a Kenshin in the front, this can generate double energy. So there are certain niche turns and certain sequences that let you play this card and essentially fulfill a 4 energy condition right away. We have, most notably, the 3-1 Kenshin, that is a color trigger, that actually, when you discard a card, immediately sets the card to active, so you can rush with this card. Very, very good card for certain endgame and mid-game and even early game scenarios. We have a 3-cost Kaoru, double energy generator, again, like I mentioned, but this card, and this is a card that I think a lot of people either don't seem to use correctly, as the regional streams have showcased, or a lot of people are just like undermining as not a useful card, I guess. This card, when it's active, as long as at the end of a battle phase no characters have been sidelined, you can tap it down at the end of a battle phase to draw a card. Now, keep in mind the term when a card has been sidelined, right? I think there are some misunderstandings of this card. If at the end of a battle phase, if a card has not been sidelined, you draw a card. That does not mean if the card has been placed to the sideline. That's a different story. In Union Arena, placing into the sideline and actually sidelining is 2 separate things. For example, when you use the special here for this deck, what it does is it bottom decks a card with 5k BP or lower. If you bottom deck a raid, you put the raid card, that's the top card, on the bottom, and the bottom base raid character goes to the sideline. That in itself is not sidelining. That is simply a board state check that puts the card in the sideline. So by playing the special, it does not turn off Kaoru Kamiya's ability to draw you a card. I think a lot of people didn't really either understand that in the regional, or simply they just forgot to trigger the effect here. And I was actually astonished at how many people were not correctly using the effect of this card. So please, if you're picking up this deck, and for anyone who's practicing with this deck, please, please, please note the 3-1 Kaoru Kamiya draws you a card at the end of your battle phase, as long as nothing has been sidelined, okay? Just keep that in mind. You have to remember that, because that hand advantage, like I said, you get drained very quickly. You need to make sure you can replenish it. The remaining cards are fairly straightforward. It's your 8 raids, one has impact, one is the double attacker. Really good offensive options, very well rounded. And then you have your 2 AP 4-2 Kenshin Himura that you can play at active, and if you discard a card from your hand once per turn, or sorry, if you take a Oath Not to Kill and from your discard and remove it once per turn, all of your Kenshins on the front line remove their during your turn condition. And if you haven't noticed, all the Kenshins during your turn conditions are literally saying, if this character wins a battle, push the loser to the energy line. So this effectively lets you start sidelining cards. And this is really, really useful in certain scenarios where you want to just kill all offensive pressure that your opponent has. We play the traditional 4 final, 4 special, and then we play 2 events here, which would rest an opponent's frontline character until the end of turn, essentially. Or if you discard it with the effect of a Red Kenshin, you get to draw a card. This is kind of reminiscent to Blue Ichigo with, Blue Bleach with Ichigo Rukia, where it also had the event where if it was discarded off the effect of a Blue Ichigo, you can draw a card. It's effectively the same thing, only this time this card's vanilla effect is to rest the character, and that can be really, really helpful in certain scenarios, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so that was the base deck list. Now we're going to go over to my deck list, which is the slightly adjusted deck list I made for myself. This is the list that I'm planning to play, or had I gone to LA Regionals, this is what I would have played. So we start off with the same 12 zeros, 4 ones. We instead play only 3 2-1 Kaoru Kamiyas, 2 of the 2-cost Kenshin Himeros again, 2 of the Hiten Mitsurugi Ryus, but this time we're playing a 2-cost Kaoru Kamiya that only generates 1 energy. And this Kaoru, in my opinion, is one of the utility cards you absolutely should be playing in your deck as a 1-of, or as a 2-of, so that you can see at least 1 of. What this does is, when it's played, you can set it to active by discarding a card from your hand. So again, you need hand size. Activate main once per turn, set it to resting. Choose one other character on your field, it gains 1k BP until the end of turn. Now, why is this important? Number one, it puts a lot of cards in wonderful thresholds. You are putting your 3k bodies to 4k, which means A, it can go over 4k bodies, but B, the blue color trigger does not bounce it anymore. It takes 4ks into 5k, so now you're actually breaking the 5k barrier, which means your impact Kenshin can't be blocked by, for example, a Kurapika or a Lancelot. And then even some other niche scenarios, right? Like if you're forced to push up your 3-1 Kaoru and make it a 3500 instead, it can go over certain walls that it usually wouldn't be able to. This card, in my opinion, is one of the only useful techs that sees repetitive play, in my opinion, and as a result is an auto-include in my deck list. Everything else is fairly straightforward. We have the exact same cards, just slightly different counts. I play only 3 3-1 Kaoru Kamiya, especially because the effect itself does not stack. It only works once. It's not once per Kaoru 3-1. It's literally just one effect of Kaoru 3-1. So I just felt like you didn't need very many more than 3 of them just to guarantee you were seeing 1. Okay. So, talking about counts and the Kaoru cards, we're going to start off with some considerations for the deck. This is any substitutions you want to make, any sort of changes that you want to, ponder over. I'm trying to discuss, what would be worthwhile to maybe think about. So, number one, how many of each Kaoru do we play? Now, a lot of people will look at the base deck list and say 4-4 is a very nice generous split, 8 double energies is really, really good. I would agree. The problem is there is a fine balance between having a lot of double energy generation and only filling your deck with double energy generation. Especially in decks where your ceiling is 4 cost, you never really want to have more than 2 of these on the board at any given time. Sometimes you will need more, right? If you're up against, for example, a purple Todo that will pull your energy line up to the front, then yeah, you obviously want more. But in this scenario, right, or in most scenarios, you don't need very many. So I dropped my counts to 3-3. There is an argument to be made where you could go 4 of the 2-1 Kaoru and 2 of the 3-1 Kaoru because you prefer the protection effect over the draw 1 effect. Other considerations is I dropped 1 of each to fit in my 2-cost buffing Kaoru. Do we instead drop just 2 of the 3-1 Kaoru, because again, it's a unique effect. So there's some discourse that you could probably have there. I would not recommend, dropping any more than 2 of each, but you can test it out for yourself. Another consideration, this is one that I thought was kind of interesting. I'm on the fence about this one. I don't think it's that great, but it has some good use cases. Sakabato. The effect is draw a card, choose up to 1 Kenshin on your field. It gains when attacking, draw a card until the end of the turn. So initially, when you just read this, the card by itself simply gives you a +1 draw and then a +1 draw on attack, so it gives you some hand advantage on the attack. What people don't realize is this actually stacks as well with the 4-cost double attack Kenshin. So when you give this effect to a double attacker, each attack also triggers draw a card, which means you are drawing effectively 3 cards on the turn that you use this on a double attack Kenshin, which can be really, really helpful at just honestly fully replenishing your hand. If you're going from like a 1-card hand to a 4-card hand, huge difference on the opponent's side for what decisions they can make now. So what are the downsides? Number 1, it costs an AP, which is already half covered by AP draw. So like realistically, the draw a card portion of its effect isn't that useful. It's effectively what is the bare minimum for a 1 AP action. Secondly, the deck already has a decent amount of draw without this card, and again, if you are correctly using your Kaoru Kamiyas, your 3-1, you're going to be drawing every turn. So honestly, you shouldn't even be that low on hand size, unless you're like really going hard aggro rush, but at that point you're probably winning the game anyways. And then lastly, unsure of what to cut or reduce. I genuinely cannot figure out what a good replacement would be for Sakabato. I want to say it's Hita Mitsurugi-ryu, but like something about that card just feels so good in comparison to Sakabato, which makes you use an AP to draw, whereas you can just discard Hiten off a card effect and you'll draw, right? So some disagreements can be made for what to be taking out of that deck list. This is the third set of considerations, and this consideration here is a little different. I call it the 5k package. Essentially what this does is you're filling your deck with cards that can buff your characters. So 1-cost Kaoru gives 1k BP until the end of turn when played. Megumi Takani when played can also give another 1500 BP, or it can bring a card from the discard that's a 1-cost or less back to your hand. So what are the benefits? Number 1, a BP increase on both cards is really, really useful, as it essentially, like I mentioned before, boosts your characters past very specific breakpoints. 3k to 4k, 4k to 5k, 25 to 35, and so on. Number 2, you have the option actually to loop this 1-cost Kaoru as a blocker and utility. So what I mean by that is, if I played 1-cost Kaoru Kamiya in the front line just to buff a Kenshin, and then I sack the body the next turn because I just need a chump blocker, right? I can then play Megumi Takani the following turn to get back the Kaoru and play it again, which means not only do I still keep a +1k, but that also means I still have another chump blocker in the front line, right? So you could in theory loop this by just constantly losing Kaoru, play another Megumi, bring it back. Lose Kaoru, play another Megumi, bring it back, right? In theory it's possible. And then lastly, it smooths out your early game curve because it's a 1-cost Kaoru. You're probably playing a lot more 1-costs, which means you're very less likely to brick. So what are the downsides to this package? Number 1, the 1-cost Kaoru takes a 1-cost Kenshin slot and 2 others, because you're very likely going from 4 1-costs to a split of 3-3 with your 1-cost for a total of 6 1-cost cards. The second downside, Megumi has no other synergies, realistically. There's nothing else that you really want to be bringing back to hand from the discard as Megumi, because A, you already have a whole bunch of Kenshins you don't need to like recover raid targets, and B, there's no other raids in the deck, so you don't need that many more. So yeah, it's 2 active triggers that work. So outside of that, no other real synergies. The third downside is to make space for all of these cards, you're removing raid target Kenshin. If you keep removing raid target Kenshin, you're eventually going to get to a point where you just don't have very many to raid on, or that you want to raid on top of. Yes, it makes Megumi slightly more effective in that sense, but it's basically ruining your consistency and effectively taking up the effect slot in Megumi Takani. Your final downside, collectively now when we talk about all the downsides combined, this package just takes too many cards, right? You're probably playing 4 Megumi Takane, 3 Karu Kamiya. How are you making 7 slots from the base deck list, let alone like my deck list? It's not possible. So very, very expensive package to add into the deck. But if you really care about the active trigger and you really care about the buffing, this could be a really, really good way to play the deck potentially, especially in like a 5k heavy meta. Okay. One more consideration here is the Yahiko Myojin 0 cost. This is actually a tech purely for the mirror, and what this does is it actually stops the 4-cost Kenshin with impact, essentially for the entire game. Again, remember, when Kenshin wins a combat, it pushes a card back from the front line to the energy line. That means the follow-up turn, you could in theory push the energy line card back up to the front line. If you do this with a Nullify Impact card, and you keep blocking an Impact ability, you are effectively infinitely looping Impact block, which is really, really useful for certain matchups, but most useful in Kenshin where you're never losing the Nullify Impact. And so it forces your opponent to have a resource in hand that removes Yahiko from the front line. If they're using a special on a 0-cost Nullify Impact, you're probably pretty happy, and if it's going to lose you the game in the end game, you were probably losing it anyways, so whatever. Another benefit is that, it smooths the early game curve. You're probably playing 2 or 3 of these, at which point, you're going to have a whole bunch of 0 costs, and you're just playing the game pretty normally. Some downsides. It takes away slots from either utilities or searchers. You never really want to take away slots from your key offensive pieces. And in this deck, everything is a good offensive piece outside of the Karus and the Searcher Kenshin. So you're probably giving up something there. Secondly, the effect of Nullify Impact overlaps with Color Kenshin. That's not to say having more Nullify Impact is bad, it just means that you're getting a little bit redundant with the count of effects, because now you have 6 to 8 cards that are Nullify Impact, which, like, realistically, your opponent's not going to have that much impact for you to just constantly loop back and forth. And then lastly, this card does not have a trigger. Pretty straightforward there. The West meta seems to be very reliant on triggers as well, so you usually don't want to play a deck that doesn't have triggers in it. And lastly, some considerations with regards to the, I guess I want to call them like niche cards in the deck list. So you're going to find yourself asking this question a lot of, do we even need these cards? And sometimes these cards can feel pretty useless. There are certainly certain matchups that this card may not feel good in, or may not feel necessary to play, or I should probably reduce the count of this and increase the count of something else, and you can make that argument. But let's go through each of these cards, because I think these are the big offenders. Oath Not to Kill is a final, and historically fast aggro decks have never needed final triggers. However, this is a well-rounded deck, and while you can play it fast aggro, you also want to try to play it with some board control in mind, so you're probably going to need extra actions through the mid-game. The 2 AP Kenshin, 2 AP costs in aggro decks are really rare. In fact, I don't remember any like hyper aggro deck that played 2 AP costs unless it could cheat you extra bodies active. I think like Yellow JJK Megumi was the only scenario where that was viable. So there's that. And then the 4-2 Kenshin activate main ability can kind of seem counterproductive to the whole like board manipulation control deal. Like, if you wanted to play a deck that sidelines characters on winning, you could have played any other 4K beater deck. So with that argument in mind, it's probably not the greatest like activate main effect. But, there are certain scenarios where it is useful, and talking about that, niche scenarios for these kinds of cards always show up. And they show up more in larger multi-round events. So regional plus play, we're going to see more rounds. With more rounds, we run into more niche scenarios. More niche scenarios means more use case for your niche cards. And certain matchups always have like really, really good use cases. For example, Hita Mitsurugi Ryu, while it may seem like you're just discarding it all the time, does have some use cases in certain end games where if you happen to have one and you just need to rest a body, you can probably just smack that bad boy down and just take the free damage for the game, right? So there are cases where you get some use out of it. We're going to get to the bread and butter here. Matchups are really, really important, and this deck has a whole bunch of them, but I'm going to focus specifically on either the Dallas Regionals top 8/top 16 results, and then the Los Angeles top 8/top 16 results, as these are the most relevant top 16s for our current meta. And we begin with Green Code Geass, Lancelot. This was the deck that took down Dallas and reigns kind of supreme as like the premier 5k deck. So what do you want to do into this matchup? You need to force as much aggression as possible. This deck is I don't want to say it's a slow ramp deck anymore because you have a lot of ways to like immediately get double energy, but it is a ramp deck that probably takes the first 2 turns just like really soft. So they will almost always let you take 2 to 3 life early, and in certain scenarios where they like whiff or they have to use an AP draw or they just don't get their double energies, they're going to ramp even worse, and so you can take even more damage off of them, which is phenomenal, right? You want to be using your fodder Kaoru, so like your 0 cost draw 1, pitch 1, as well as your 2k Kenshin bodies as block fodder, so you can remove the double damage threat. So there are certain cases where you want to take the first 2 damage as well, just keep in mind as the receiving end of double damage, but in this matchup, I don't recommend it. There's just so many ways where they can go 6 cost Lancelot, 8 cost Lancelot, 8 cost Lancelot. You are taking 6 damage this turn. Scoop up your cards, right? So you don't want to give them that opportunity to end the game. You want to save your special trigger for the 8 cost Lancelot primarily, or in certain cases the 6 cost Lancelot, where they have the 3/1 Suzaku with the draw card effect on the when play. Primarily because Lancelot, 6 cost Lancelot, when it is sidelined, sends the base card to the owner's hand. So if they have a 3/1 Suzaku when play draw card in there, they can play that, sack the Lancelot, bring it back, play it again. Raid it, sack the Lancelot, play it again, right? You could infinitely loop that, or not infinitely, but you could loop that draw card effect. And then lastly, in the end game, if they don't have very many double energy generators, which they almost always do, but in a case where like you really starve them and now they're on like 2 double energies in the back line, the 4/2 Kenshin activate main ability can be really, really useful, because then all of your Kenshins can suddenly start knocking units out, which means you are removing offensive pressure from their board. And so being able to flip that switch is really, really nice. Overall, this deck is I want to say like a 50-50 matchup. It really matters on who draws what cards when. And, you know, triggers obviously matter, and like resource management matters, but generally I'd give this a toss-up matchup. Okay, next we're going to go to Blue Film Metal Alchemist, Roy Mustang. So this is the deck that I played, and it has a near and dear spot in my heart, as it did get me the top 4 in GenCon Regionals, but I actually think this deck has gotten a little worse, not significantly, but enough that it matters. In this matchup, you want to force as much aggression as possible as well, but for a different reason. This deck is extremely reliant on good setup. So when you're going forward against this deck, they tend to either make one of 2 mistakes. Either they raid too early, which is super punishable, or they have a really bad energy line setup, which again, super punishable, right? This deck really relies on, hey, I need my double energies in the back, I need to make sure raid targets are in the back, I need to make sure my utility exists, and I need to make sure I have a hand size that matters. So it's just a lot of I have to haves in this current meta, where an aggro deck can kind of just like beat you down for it. One of the strats against Roy is always flood your board with 4k bodies, because Roy himself cannot clear multiple. His effect lets you special off a body. You're probably letting Roy hit you for 1 damage, but everything else is just going to be a 4k, so the following turn you can clap back with all your 4k bodies. As a result, there are certain cases where like raiding the vanilla card, or sorry, playing the vanilla card instead of raiding it is actually better. And we saw that in the we saw that in LA Regionals, not specifically with this matchup, but there were cases where like you could play the vanilla 4K card and it would be a better board state. You want to save your special trigger for the raid, specifically Roy. You never want to let Roy stay on the board for too long, if longer than one turn. Some versions of Roy Mustang play Edward Elric. Unless the game is going to end the next turn, please, please, please do not special Edward. It is not worth it. Roy and Riza are both way more threatening onboard threats than Edward Elric ever will be, and I think that card is garbage anyways in the list, so if you see that, don't worry too much about it. Just throw your three cost nullify impact in front of Edward and call it a day. Lastly, your 2-1 Karu completely neuters Roy. This is actually a really funny interaction. Your 2-1 Karu is effectively a protection, where when you activate the main, you can select a Kenshin on your front line. It cannot be targeted by abilities. By the way, that means card abilities, events, sites, triggers, every version of abilities. It cannot be targeted unless the opponent pays an extra card. Now, Roy's effect already makes them pay a card to pop something. So, if you protected a Kenshin that he wants to pop, he has to discard an extra card. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but to pop a 4K, you need to discard 5 cards. That sounds really, really bad, as you're basically just throwing your hand into the discard, and almost never happens unless your opponent is actually trying to end the game right then and there. So, just keep that in mind. 2-1 Kaoru, very great in the matchup. Okay, we're going to look at the Renji Rush version 2 deck list as well. This is a brute force matchup. For those who aren't aware, this is the version of Purple Bleach where you're just playing really big bodies and you're swinging aggressively. So the deck plays a lot of vanilla raid bodies aggressively as just their way of just having board pressure. It's very easily punished because if they do this, then the card stands, which means it hasn't swung that turn, which means if you are beating them down, then, you know, they're going to either push back into their energy line, or they're going to just take free life for no reason. In this matchup, you want to flood the board with 4K bodies. You're trying to match as much as the Purple Bleach decks do, because at the end of the day, you play more 4Ks than they will. You save the special trigger specifically for the raid cards. Do not do this for the 4-1 damage to Ichigo, for example, as it's only half effective. You don't have squad zeros in the removal to really worry about with this deck list. You want to be throwing that 5-cost Ichigo down to the bottom of the deck. You want to be throwing the Renji that gives double damage to the bottom of the deck. But any other cards you really don't care about. 2-1 Karu, again, very useful here. Every single one of their abilities has to target a card, which means your 2-1 Karu is usually probably having some form of forcing the opponent to discard the card. One important thing here, do not activate your 4-2 Kenshin in this matchup. Again, this deck relies a lot on being able to go aggressive, and one of the tools to do so is the 5-cost Ichigo, where for every card in the sideline that they remove, they can pop 500 BP times the number of cards they removed. So if their sideline's big, it's always like, oh, they probably have free reign to pop whatever. Which means you do not want to activate Kenshin to knock stuff out into the sideline. You want to force the opponent to put everything in the removal on their own volition. And then lastly, Hitamitsu Ryu on Nullify Impact. I don't remember off the top of my head which Nullify Impact card they have, but they do have Nullify Impacts in their deck list, so you want to make sure you're sleeping that to make sure your Impact Kenshin is going to land damage. I think this matchup's like pretty good. I wouldn't say favored necessarily, but like it slightly leans towards your favor, so I'd be very comfortable with this matchup. Now, for some reason, in the same IP, you have your worst matchup, so I don't know, man. Purple Bleach Squad 0 is a really, really hard matchup, and I think this is like the premier difficult matchup for Red Kenshin. Number one, if they have the Squad 0 site, you're probably losing the game. And while yes, that's the case with most matchups, for Squad Zero. It's really bad and very apparent in this matchup specifically why the site matters. On the flip side, this deck is like really bricky. It's not super consistent on their startup, and sometimes we'll just end up having like a whole bunch of cards you don't want in hand. So you might end up getting like a really free matchup. Who knows? It's a 50-50 coin flip. This deck utilizes both the sideline and removal very well. It plays the 5/1 Ichigo that I mentioned before, where it takes cards from sideline to removal. It also plays the 4/1 Ichigo, where based on the number of Squad Zeros in your removal, it gets bonuses like damage 2 and impact 1. It also plays a lot of cards where like you can take cards from hand into removal to like pop bodies. You want to be able to rush aggressively as hard as you possibly can into this deck, because you want to force them to either A, remove raid targets, or B, lose a lot of life. You need to end the game quickly, because if you're trying to play a War of Attrition with a deck that has triple the number of specials you have, you're probably not winning that game ever. So please try and win quickly. Your 2 on Karu technically has the highest efficiency here because almost every ability is a targeted ability. I say technically because if they have the sight down, the discard a card effect is basically mitigated by the draw a card effect from the Squad Zero sight, so it doesn't really do much. Be very careful with your 4K bodies available. Like I mentioned, this deck runs 12 special triggers. It runs the 4 specials, it runs the 4 Senjumarus, and then it runs any combination of your 5/1 Ichigos, and I'm missing something. No, that's it. Just 4 5/1 Ichigos, right? So that's 12 total special triggers, essentially. And then lastly, you'll notice this 4/1 Ichigo over here has Nullify Impact, so you want to use hit 10 Mitsurugi Ryu to sleep your Nullify Impacts and really get the damage through. If you run into this deck, it's probably not a great matchup, and honestly, I'm surprised more people didn't play this deck in Los Angeles Regionals. Either A, they didn't test this matchup correctly and they didn't realize this deck is really good, or B, they just like really wanted to play Kenshin, I guess, and they thought that was a fun deck. But I can tell you right now, going into Montreal, I'm expecting Squad Zero to see a bit of an uptick in play. Okay, this is my least favorite deck, which sucks because I love this IP. Blue JJK, I say Sukuna Plus because there are variations. You can play Sukuna Yuji, you can play Pure Sukuna, you can play Sukuna Yuji Nanami, you can play Sukuna Nanami, whatever. I'm going to throw them all into the same category here. I can't express enough how disappointed I am in this IP, because I love Blue JJK, I love the flavor they have with the fingers, but it's so damn easy to brick with this deck. To the point where I think the deck itself is actually kind of fake. And what I mean by that is, this deck doesn't actually have as much of a threat as you would think, because over the course of a regional, it's really unlikely that this deck will have enough wins. So it's not too big of a deal. But nevertheless, I'll talk about it because it's a popular IP. Number one, if they have no fingers in discard, beat the living crap out of them, okay? This deck does not do anything without fingers unless you're playing the pure Nanami version, like Sukuna Nanami. Even then, your Sukuna is not there for impact anymore, it's there for draw. So you want to aggro as hard as physically possible and make it so they can't get to the mid to late game. If they do have fingers early, you can kind of play it in a different way. You can choose to play it a little safer and play around just drawing a bunch of cards with Kaoru and playing a whole bunch of 4K non-raid bodies and just playing around Yuji 4K bouncing bodies back. And if you have your 4K bodies, it's still threats because none of these cards are 5Ks defensively. So they have to deal with it, but you just have a lot more flexibility with what you're willing to sack. A point that we just already touched on, be aware of the raid Yuji. Utilizing your 4K vanilla bodies can be really helpful, especially if they don't play the Nanami variant. Special trigger, your priority in this matchup is almost always following the order of when sideline Nanami, so the Nanami that when sidelined, discard or mill 2, sleep an opponent. You always special that. 4/1 Sukuna, so the Sukuna with impact that draw 2, discard 1, because you just don't want impact on there. The when attacking Nanami is the next priority because Lowering your BP means your defense is effectively worse by a good margin. And then lastly, you can bottom deck Yuji Itadori, not nearly as useful. Notice how I'm ignoring the 5-1 Sukuna, because 5-1 Sukuna is a when-played ability that doesn't offer much anymore, and it rarely affects how you do your calculations for the game versus like Sukuna, for example, or the 4-1 Sukuna or the 4-1 Nanami. So you don't really care that much about it. If they play the 5-1 Yuji Itadori, the one that reduces the amount or the cost of Sukuna cards from the opponent's hand, you can maybe consider adjusting your priority based on how much energy they have and what they're likely to play next turn. If you think like, oh shit, we're probably going to see a 7-1 Sukuna at some point and it'll be really, really cheap because it's now a 6-1 Sukuna and you have 6 energy, you can probably bottom deck that. And then lastly, your 4-2 Kenshin activate main, the one that lets you start sidelining characters, can be devastating when you time it right. Like, a lot of the times, the blue JJK decks will just be like, oh, I'm going to shove a whole bunch of chump blockers, or I'm going to shove a whole bunch of 4K bodies because, you know, I know that I'm just going to get it back on the energy line. And then as soon as they do that, they leave their energy line empty, you just pop the 4-2 Kenshin ability and go, okay, block or lose the game. And if they block out, then it's like, oh, I now no longer have anything to attack with. Really, really useful. Sorry, to close Blue Sukuna here, I think this is like a joke deck anyways, but if I wanted to give it a rating, this is probably favored to you like 60-40. Maybe even like 65-35. Okay. The flavor of Blue JJK, or of JJK, and my boy Div's favorite deck here, Purple JJK Todo, is a tricky deck, but it's actually not that hard to deal with as Red Kenshin. In fact, this is probably one of your easier matchups. First off, the deck only runs 8 4K bodies, which means on an offensive perspective, there really isn't much that they got for you. Feel free to just beat them down as hard as you can. They're probably not going to retaliate nearly as hard as you hit. Secondly, the 3-1 color trigger Kenshin is really, really efficient here. You want to just aggro rush, and because an aggro rush 4K and they don't have very many 4K bodies, you're effectively just gaining rush and guaranteeing a damage or guaranteeing a body because there's nothing they can do to block it. Save your special trigger for the 6-cost Mechamaru or the 5-cost Todo. I personally think removing impact is more important than removing double damage. So you only target the Todo if there is a low risk of Mechamaru coming into play. Otherwise, you can just like give Todo chump blockers because it's a damage 2 that doesn't really do much, so just give it to him. But the number one tip I have for this matchup, and this is not just Red Kenshin, this is for every other deck in the meta. If you are playing double energy cards, really have to account for Aoi Todo's energy line to frontline swap. You want to make sure that you are playing 2 double energies at the same time, so even if he does pull one of them to the front or swaps one to the front, you're pretty much okay playing the game because it's a 4-cost deck anyways. Now, if you don't have any double energy in the backline, it's fine. You can technically play the game, but you're significantly neutered in speed. You need to make sure that you always have 1 double energy in the backline. In this matchup, you probably want to make sure you have 2. Overall, though, there's nothing much more to say about this matchup. I think like it's relatively favored to you. Again, like 65-35. Okay, Yellow One Punch Man. I'm going to include all variations of Saitama, including the Sisters match, as well as the other variation of the other Yellow Saitama card. No, all variations of Yellow One Punch Man are kind of bricky. We can talk about why that's the case in some other time, but generally speaking, like, you're not really that worried about them unless they high roll. You force as much aggression as possible. Saitama himself cannot block because he's forced to rest, so take advantage with multi-swings. Your double attack Kenshin here is really, really value, especially if you're playing Takabato. You're like almost guaranteed to draw like all 3 and take 3 life, which like is a massive swing into your favor. And since Saitama basically can't be interacted with because you cannot remove it off the board, you just focus on removing the support cards. And that could be Genos, that could be Tornado, that could be Hellish Blizzard. But you want to save your special trigger, particularly for Hellish Blizzard, as that's one of the only ways that Yellow One Punch Man actually gets really, really meaningful chip damage is by recycling events. You can, in theory, remove Terrible Tornado or Genos if you want to remove the threat of impact or the threat of, I believe Genos is double block nullify impact. I could be wrong off the top of my head there. Whatever is more threatening on the board, you usually want to remove. The fun part about this is if you remove the double blocker Genos, that Genos' effect is when sidelined, set a Saitama to active, so you would have a 10k blocker. Your special doesn't let them do that because it's not sidelined, it's bottom decked. So they just feel really, really bad playing that, or going up against that card. Overall, this is like a fairly, again, favored matchup for you. I'm going to say like 60-40. Don't worry about it, just play the game. Now we get to Green One Punch Man. This deck is super free as a matchup, I think, personally. It's an easy matchup that, you know, any deck that has multi-attack was pretty good into Green One Punch Man. You just swing really aggressively. You make sure you hit with all of your non-raid bodies. You don't want to give King a target to use his when play effect on, but if you want to just chip damage, feel free to raid a double attacker and just like take 4 life, and then your next double attacker is probably ending the game anyways, so it doesn't matter that much. Your 2-1 Karu protection is really useful here. You're probably protecting your double attack Kenshin because you want to keep that on the board as long as possible. On the flip side, they have to remove that as fast as possible. And then lastly, you're saving your special trigger for the King Raid. That removes 2 energy from the front line because it generates energy on the front line. You can, in theory, special the 6-cost Silver Fang if you just want to end the game. So 3-cost King Raid can't block anyways. If you're removing their main blocker, which is the 6-cost Silver Fang, they're probably taking like 3 to 4 life that turn. Chances are you can end the game on that turn. This matchup is like, I would almost say 70-30. As long as you don't brick as the Red Kenshin, you're running these guys through. Yeah, like this, I wouldn't even consider worrying about this one. Okay, so now we're getting to the hard stuff. I say the hard stuff because it's Kenshin stuff, but I actually think the Red Kenshin mirror match is one of the most skill expressive, but also one of the most aggravatingly difficult ones. It's a very annoying matchup. It's a war of attrition. You want to attack aggressively as much as possible. You do not ever discard your 4-1 double attack Kenshin. Obviously, your impact Kenshin is very good here as well, but your double attack Kenshin is what swings the board advantage to your favor. So do not ever discard that card if you're making decisions. 2-1 Kaoru is very useful here. You're protecting double attack Kenshin. Again, your double attacks are going to be like some of the key win cons of this deck. You want to save the special trigger for the 4-cost double attack Kenshin unless you are about to die immediately and you're in really, really like close threat of just losing the game, in which case you're specialing the impact Kenshin. You're using Hita Mitsurugi on any nullify impact, which is usually the 3-cost 4k Kenshin, the color trigger. That's the nullify impact. You're probably putting that to sleep. And then a little bit of advice in this matchup. You want to play the 4-2 activate main in certain cases where the board state shows that the backline is just energy generation, no real threat. In the mirror match, you're probably like playing tit for tat on what gets pulled back, what gets pushed up, what gets pulled back, what gets pushed up. If you suddenly just go 4-2 Kenshin, remove Oath to Kill, I'm knocking out your entire front line, they're going to start being like, oh crap, I need you to just take life then, because I can't afford to lose these bodies for the follow-up turn. The 2-1 Kaoru with the buff, the one that gives you plus 1k, is really, really nice here, because it makes your 3k Kenshins 4k, as well as your 2-cost 4k Kenshins 4k on the offense. And any Kenshins, or more Kenshins that push back the opponent, are really, 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 really helpful. The reason why I say double attack Kenshin is so useful in this is because you're just constantly pushing back and filling up the opponent energy line in the mirror match, and then when they push up, they have nothing else to play the game with. And you just keep doing it over and over and over again. If you play the 0-cost Yahiko, which we talked about earlier, that was a mirror match tech, this is such a good matchup for you. You're basically playing an infinite loop nullify impact, where if you have one color trigger Kenshin and one Yahiko on the board, you can just constantly just go, okay, you're pushing my double energy to the back, I'm pushing Yahiko. You're pushing Yahiko to the back, I'm pushing double energy to the front. You just keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and they just never get impact damage off, which is like part of the only way they actually do meaningful damage in the mirror match. As is the case with all mirror matches, this is a 50-50, but I think this mirror match is super, super interesting in how it interact, or how the board states interact with one another. You got to be really, really careful in the mirror match, because one small slip up of like what I can do my next turn, as soon as you slip and make a mistake on what resources you have available to next turn, the advantage your opponent gains snowballs out of control. So just like really, when you're playing this mirror match, think about the impact of all of your actions. Just take that in stride. And lastly, we're going to talk about Purple Kenshin. For those of us who tested a lot, we knew that Saito was actually a pretty decent deck. But I'll be the first to admit as well, I didn't think he was going to do this well. And I also didn't think it was going to be this popular, frankly. Purple Saito is a deck that, on paper, is rather well-rounded in the aggression, but you realize that the deck itself runs out of gas a lot, probably because there's not as much draw in this deck. In fact, a lot of it is just searchers. So you end up, if you just end up playing a resource war against this deck, you're probably going to end up like winning in 5-6 turns. Like, it'll take a while. You're going to focus on attacking aggressively with small bodies. And these small bodies are going to be doing a lot of chip damage that the Saito deck just, like, they're going to let you deal the damage, but they don't want to let you do too much, because they know that as soon as you push your big raids in, they're losing the game. You want to save your special trigger for the 6-cost Hajime Saito. If that Saito is not coming out, or if there's no threat of that Saito coming out, you can use special on the 4-cost Hajime Saito. But generally, as long as they're smart, and the opponent leaves one energy slot in the back open, the 6-cost Hajime Saito is always a threat. So try to keep that in mind. You're going to use Hitamitsu Rigiryu on the Nullify Impact, which is a 4-cost Searcher Hajime Saito. And again, the 4-2 activate main, you want to use this in a board state where the backline is just pure energy generation, because you can then wipe out all offensive pressure and they can't do much. Now, one caveat with this matchup. The 6-cost Hajime Saito, the way it works, for those who don't know, when played, if you have no cards with affinities on your field, this character gains all abilities listed below. It becomes a 5k, and it can attack from the energy line. When the character attacks from the energy line, move it to the front line, it gains Snipe. So, when you're doing when attacks, or when this character attacks, all of the following text happens within the simultaneous time of the attack. What does that mean? That means if I'm swinging it in the energy line, I'm going to move it to the front, it's going to be a 5k body, and it's going to have Snipe, so I can now target something. You're effectively swinging 5 times. 4 in the front line, 1 in the energy line, but that last energy line hit is now a Snipe. Snipe as a backline attacker is really, really obnoxious. So please try not to leave just one obvious frontline target. You want to make sure that like you have an abundance of aggressive options when they finally do play the 6-cost Saito, and you have to make them pick, oh, what am I removing off the board, and will it affect me in the future? But in general, I think when I was testing this matchup, it really ended up just being a 50-50 toss-up. I don't want to say it's favored for either side, but this one really just felt like if you played it smart and safe, I think it was favored to Kenshin. But if you were forced to just be rushed down and you had to like flounder for a board state, you're probably losing. So I don't know how I feel about this matchup. It's 50-50 in my mind. Okay. Now, last but certainly not least, the useful info. This is generic tips and tricks for everybody who plays the game. I know we're getting a little long on the video timer here, so apologies. I'll try to blast through this as best as I can. Your 4-2 Kenshin. So this is the only Kenshin that does not have the during your turn condition, which means as its own vanilla card, it can start sidelining characters. You want to be careful that this does not affect the draw effect from your 3-1 Kaoru, because it will prevent you from drawing at the end of the attack phase. Secondly, you want to activate the main in cases where you want to wipe off offensive pressure from the opponent. Either they don't have any raid targets, or all of their energy is double energy generators, in which case, if you blast all their frontline away, it's really hard for them to play the game now because they have been playing in such a way where they're like, oh, we're probably going to leave X number of slots open so we can push the aggression back in. No, we're wiped now. We're probably losing the game. That switch up from the normal strategy to a removal strategy really confuses the opponents, and again is a part of why this deck works so well, is because it preys on forcing your opponent to make decisions. Please, 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 when you play this card, do not use it as just a purely aggressive attacker just because it comes in active. If you're going to do that anyways, your 3-1 color Kenshin does the exact same thing, but the only condition is discard a card. Instead of having 2 AP, you can play 2 3-1 Kenshins and make them both rush immediately with the same number of actions that this Kenshin Himura will allow you to do. So just keep that in mind. You don't want this card on the board unless you have to use it. Second one, Hiten Mitsurugi Ryu. Very common question, which effect is more important? Do I want to discard the card, or do I want to actually use the resting ability? And the general rule of thumb is, if you need more aggro and pressure, you want to use the rest ability. Very rarely is this the case. In fact, almost never is there a case where this card is the end game decider. But in scenarios where it is, you want to use this effect. Otherwise, in all other cases, if you just want resources or setup, you discard the card with the Kenshin effect, and you just draw an extra 1. You can consider this as like your 1-card mulligan. Okay? Should you play less or more? Really debatable. I think decks like Blue Bleach for Ichigo Rukia kind of showed that like these style of cards, while it has niche cases, is not too game defining for the deck archetype. This one obviously is slightly different, but the ability to draw cards off of a fodder throwaway is really, really good. I could see an argument for maybe playing 3 of them. I would not play more than 3 of them, and I certainly would not play less than 1 of them. Lastly, the most important, reserving resources. In my opinion, and this game is still young, so I'm forgiving people for this, one of the most egregious mistakes you can make in this game is that people try and raid so aggressively and just like run through the opponent no matter what your deck is. And as a result, if you get punished in any capacity, you're sitting there not playing the game anymore. You don't want to make it where like your only decision is C card, play card, and you lose the game, because that's really detrimental. It doesn't teach you anything, it doesn't show you how the decks interact, and most importantly, it doesn't give you any win conditions. Really consider what each card effect does for you and whether or not you need to use it that turn. One of the very common issues that we had was like, do I raid this card now? Number one, do you need to raid it? Like, is the effect so good that it swings the board in your favor? Or could you just push the card up, reset up your energy line, and then you would still be taking the same 1 life, but now you have a better energy line for the next turn, right? Like, there's these considerations you have to make. Lastly, one of the main questions that you want to ask, is there a better use case? There's a lot of cases, like I mentioned before, where like you want to make sure that you're using a card efficiently, and that means you have to use it for the correct use case. If you're just throwing it out there for the sake of throwing it out there, don't bother. Okay, thank you for reading and watching this video. Let me know if you want to see more, or if it helped at all, or if there's any other decks that you want to maybe take a stab at, or any archetypes. I will be happy to read through all the comments and take any suggestions. Thanks for watching, guys. This was Alex, aka Carryion, and best of luck, and I'll see you next time.